Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the JTM Community Podcast, where we are building a community you can bank on. I'm your host, Jason Melvin. If you are watching this, you already know who our guest is for this conversation. You can check him out in a previous episode. I think it was the last aired episode on motivation and routine. Without giving any more away, I want to dive into what the topic will be. So this is a guest choice topic on self-awareness. Of course, if you want to touch base with me for advancement advising, you can do so at j-tm.community/podcast, where you can also submit your votes. You'll get updates if you're watching this in March. We're currently doing a spring event. So any likes, subscriptions, follows, comments, engagements, votes, will enter each one of those. For every post, we'll enter you into a drawing for a $25 Amazon gift card at the end of March. It'll actually be pulled on April 1st. It's not an April Fool's joke, despite what it might sound like. If you want additional resources and information, you can also check out the website. There is a section for both community partners, which has info there, as well as resources for the Mount Pleasant, Michigan area and national resources in general. The easiest thing that you can do if you're wanting to join our community is to join our Facebook. You'll get instant updates. Podcast episodes get there. Voting by one click is there. Engagement with it within the community is there as well. The last thing is our TikTok. It's not just about our videos, but more significantly is the liked videos. There's tons and tons and tons and tons of videos there. New ones get added every day. You will find what you're looking for. It might be the first video. It might be the 300th. Just be careful of the black hole that is, of course, TikTok. Without further ado, my buddy, my nephew, Lukas Ebright. Technically it's Tracy's nephew, but I mean, come on, right? So a little bit of background about Lukas, in case this is the first time that you're catching him as a guest. He has essentially always been an athlete, whether it has been, largely football towards the end of your high school career. I know there's baseball and basketball was in there as well. And then once you had graduated, had gone into the bodybuilding competition. We previously discussed some of the roadblocks due to essentially COVID and injury there. Luke is currently in higher education, going through a clinical exercise physiology program. There's a little bit of context. So I know we were wanting to talk about self-awareness. So Luke, when you think of self-awareness, what does that mean to you? What comes to mind?
First of all, before we get started, thanks for doing this, because I know this is going to be a very interesting discussion, and I hope that a lot of people will take some things away from this that'll help them out in life. So,
sure.
Self-awareness, I think, is a very complicated subject. There are many variables that come into it. So, for example, one variable would be self-discipline, the ability to reflect on yourself and your previous actions, and also the ability of self-criticism. So off of those three variables, I think that there's three pillars to this. And the first pillar is mind, second is body, and the third is spirit. And I think the spirit aspect of it is a byproduct of the mind and the body.
What do you mean by that? That the spirit aspect is a byproduct of the mind and the body?
I see your spirit is your personality, how you influence the world and how you treat other people. Okay. So if you throw one of those three pillars off balance, like your mind or your body, that's going to throw off your spirit and how you treat other people as well. So in my particular case, when I was out of the gym because of injury and I really couldn't, I work out for my mental health because it really helps me stay sane. So when I was out of the gym, that really influenced the way I thought about myself. So just from the aspect of me not being able to take care of my body physically, it changed my mindset about myself and the confidence that I have always had going into other tasks. So that's what I mean when I say, if you throw one out of order, then that's going to throw off all of the other pillars and you're going to crumble.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to challenge that idea of spirit being the byproduct of physical and mind, right? So if I reverse that, whether we're coming from a direction of like religion or faith or just spirituality, and I know you defined it as more of like personal characteristics, personality, right? So if a person has a strong or a struggle in faith, can that not inversely impact their mind or impact the physical element of them?
I kind of need you to like ask that question in maybe a more simplistic way, because
Yep. So let's say somebody is experience. We'll use faith as an example because it's more tangible, right? So regardless of what somebody's faith may be, I'll just pick Christianity for ease of conversation, right? So if somebody is struggling in their faith, does that not also have an impact on the mind and body?
I do believe that has an impact on the mind and body.
Okay, so they're
first
almost.
Of all,
go ahead.
First of all, if you know that you're struggling in faith,
Sure.
that means that you know that something's wrong and you should probably improve on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that definitely influences the way that you think, because you know something's wrong and you know you should do something about it. So,
sure. Which is that self-awareness for sure. So
self-awareness.
Even in what you're describing is spirit isn't just a byproduct. There are almost 3 equal measures in the recipe that is self-awareness, that without one, it is going to directly impact, to varying degrees, of course, right? To other things. And I'm the same as you, and I think most people are. I mean, there's research that show it, of the positive impacts of physical activity, right? Being physically healthy, and the impact on the mind, which continues a ripple effect, if you will, across someone's life, right? Their attitude, their perceptions, all of these things. And then when those are out of whack, of course, so not just being physically ill, right? So it could be nutritional. So given what I do, which being a counselor essentially by trade, is that something like an iron deficiency. So the physical, right, in the sense of the mind, can resemble depression. So a person can have feel lethargic, have the lack of energy, right? And all of these things, and again, I agree, kind of intermingle. At times, what we don't know is why. So it's not uncommon that somebody would engage with me trying to figure out depression, when we have to start immediately taking a holistic view of what does their life look like? When's the last time you had gone to the doctor? When's the last time you had a blood draw, right? Because you can do all the work in the world to try and manage depression, but if the cause is you're malnourished, right, that's where you have to start. It's not just about treating the symptoms, for sure. You had initially talked about 3 pillars. What kind of spurred the conversation and the idea? Just before we started the podcast, you had mentioned having a conversation with, I think it's okay if I say, a friend, right? So what aspects of that, what light bulb moments kind of triggered that you're like, hey, like this is something I want to talk about?
Well, I talked to them yesterday because I just wanted to get a different perspective on it. I think I had my own perspective about the discipline and
Sure.
the self-criticism.
Yep.
And when I had this conversation with them, they actually mentioned like 3 pillars. They actually said it was 4 pillars, because the woman I spoke to, she was reading a book that actually talked about self-awareness, and there was 4 pillars of it. Mm-hmm. It was, the 4th one was like the worldly aspect, which I kind of blended into the spiritual, because like that's your personality and how you influence the world.
Yep.
So that's kind of where I got the 3 pillars idea. And I'm glad that I talked to her about it, because that definitely expanded my mind on the subject of self-awareness and how there's just so many variables that come into play when talking about it.
So that would have been yesterday, and you had reached out and we chatted, I think it was the day or two before that. So what was it that you experienced that were like, hey, like this is a thing that I want to have a conversation about?
I was actually doing some self-reflecting on myself, and I came to the realization that I have came a long way since the person that I started out to be, like, let's say in high school. So I'll admit I was not perfect in high school. I made a lot of mistakes. I didn't treat people with respect. Not everybody. You could consider me as a bully, because I really just disrespected people a lot. And it never got into like a physical altercation of bullying, but it was more of just like, I would put others down to make myself feel better. And I look at myself now and I think, wow, you've really came a long way of like how you treated people and how you treat people now. So I wanted to talk about how I came this far and how you develop such a skill to control your mind and your thoughts, because the way that you think is the way you behave.
Oh, sure.
So the way that I thought about others reflected on how I treated them compared to myself. And now the way that I think about myself, it influences the way that I act.
Oh, absolutely. Can you kind of walk us through kind of what the mindset, and I know it might be difficult given this was years ago now, what that looked like at the high school level, where you describe yourself as a bully and how you looked down on others and how you treated them. Can you walk us through that and the transition to who you've grown to be now?
Yeah, so I believe it had everything to do with my faith. Okay. In high school, I really got wrapped up into drug use, and I was smoking marijuana like every single day. And that really, I think it really got me into a hole where it was really tough to get out of. And when you smoke marijuana, it really opens up your mind to like question everything. So I started questioning my faith. Like, do I really believe in God? And is there a such thing as a higher power? And I actually became a self-proclaimed atheist. I claimed that I didn't believe in God anymore. And shortly after high school, it was 2020, I believe. Might have been 2021, early 2021. But I had this experience. I was out with friends in the woods, and I felt like I had this spiritual calling where this life is so much more complicated than evolution of atoms in your body and how people develop. But that really opened up my mind to a higher power and how we got here. Shortly after that, my grandfather died, and that really hit me hard, and I didn't know what to do. I just had to believe like he's in a better place now.
Sure.
So shortly after his death, I started praying a lot more, and I was calling out to God and asking for guidance. And sure enough, it was like a month or two later, I had this incredible experience in one of my dreams that I knew it was from him. And that just confirmed my prayers that like there is a higher power now. And that totally transitioned on how I wanted to treat other people and how I come about life.
So it was really going back to the 3 pillars, is the combination of those, right? So you impacted yourself physically, right? So I mean, you essentially did it artificially through substance, right? That led to other experiences of the mind, which essentially transitioned to a spiritual experience, right? So that kind of kicked off, being one example, and then the loss of grandpa. was all three of those combined, right? A physical an experience of the mind, but also a spiritual experience, right? And the need to understand, or maybe more importantly, the need to believe that there's more out there, right? There's more meaning. There's more to this whole thing. As you said, there's more than just the accumulation of atoms, right? And I would definitely agree, though it may not be the most supported ideology, but I also believe in essentially evolution through grace, right? So the idea of we can be made, and I truly believe we're scientific beings, right? We're physical, biological beings, but that doesn't take away from faith either, right? Because if that biology and evolution is also guided by a higher power, like those two things tend to be pit against each other, but they aren't mutually exclusive in any way. And as we continue to learn and understand, like the backing of those things will change and evolve, right? As it should, right? Nothing is set in stone unless it literally is, right? Which there are things. So if we reflect to faith, the Ten Commandments as being an example of those. So it was through those combinations, those three combinations of the physical, the mind, and spiritual impact. There's definitely a journey, right? I'm going to argue that if I take those away, it doesn't take the physical mind or spirituality in the way that we're discussing it to have a moral compass, right? So even before those things, when you were being, to use your word, a bully, right? You knew it wasn't okay then, but you justified it somehow to yourself. How did you transition that?
Transition from being a bully to my position now?
The mindset of justifying being a bully to now. Because you always would have known that's not okay. I mean, I've known you for a hot minute, including while you were in high school, and the culture, at least in family, that you were exposed to, right? And I know part of it plays into your sense of humor, right? So having a dark or twisted or raunchy, maybe, sense of humor, as could be this full display when we dropped some food off the other day, right? Which I won't go into more detail there. At the same time, your moral compass was still intact, even when you were doing things that violated it. Like you were not in a position of simply not knowing what was right or wrong. So what swayed you to being more uncomfortable doing the wrong thing, more uncomfortable in treating people without respect?
Okay, that definitely helps me understand what you're asking. So
yeah, bud.
My way of justifying it was simply just banter. Like, I was just teasing. There's no reason to take it personally. But that transition started when, like, what's the purpose of that? Like, why would you intentionally tease somebody about something that you don't even know if they're self-conscious about? They could be like going to bed thinking like, why is this me? Or something like that. And it was just a pretty simple transition. It's like, that's just not necessary. You don't want to bring other people down about something that you have no idea what they're thinking about.
Yeah, where you can't necessarily understand the impact of the words or the actions that you have on them.
Yeah, that's exactly self-awareness. Like, it doesn't just impact you, it impacts the world.
Yep, the world around you. And I know we've had previous conversations of similar experiences, but happening towards you, right? Where there's been people in your life that said or did things that caused harm or caused a depreciation in, like, your self-value, or made you question relationships or what you wanted to do, or what you wanted essentially to to become or to challenge motivations and various things, whether it's through family, friends, or and just life experiences for sure. As we continue to move towards this idea of self-awareness, are you okay if I pivot to another dynamic that we haven't talked about, but I feel is very, very important?
Sure, of course.
Yeah. I think self-awareness is essential, most definitely, and to steal from G.I. Joe, knowing is half the battle, right? That's probably a reference that is way too old for you, but the idea of that is self-awareness is awesome. It can be a blessing. It can also feel hurtful, right? But that hurt can also be a fertilizer, right? So being able to reflect and feel like, fuck, like I was a bully, right? And if that causes some sort of discomfort, right, that's actually a good thing, because that's where you're going to grow from it. And from what I hear you saying, that is exactly part of that situation. The flip side of that is self-awareness also isn't shit if it's not put into action, right? So how do we transition? How did you transition from having the insight, which we'll call self-awareness of whatever it would be, to then put that insight, that awareness into action? Because I feel that's where a lot of people get stuck, right? They'll have something, and even if it's for a brief moment, where they have that light bulb moment, it's a good idea, they know they should make a change or make a shift, right? Whether it's an attitude, perception, it could be to a degree of finances or family or friend or jobs or whatever it would be, where they have that, but that isn't pushed into fruition. There's no action taken.
So I do like the idea of the G.I. Joe quote, knowing is half the battle.
Mm-hmm.
That reminds me of a quote in another movie. It's the first step in solving any problem is knowing that there is one.
Yep. Yeah.
So when you're able to recognize that there is a problem and you should improve on it, I would say the best way to attack that is you got to have a form of self-identity, know who you are. Mm-hmm. And you have to stay true to yourself. So the person that you want to be, and you want other people to perceive you that way, mm-hmm. you got to stay true to that. So let's say from my situation, do I want to be perceived as a person who treated people like shit? Mm-hmm. Or do I want to be perceived as someone who cares for other people and has compassion? And that's probably the best way that I can put it, is just stay true to yourself, the person that you want to be.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So challenging that idea. So what if the way somebody is, I don't know how to word this in a better way, so I'm going to fumble for a second, is so I'm going to use you, rewind the clock back to your bullying days. Okay. So in that moment, that was you, right? And you know it was because that's what you were doing, right? And you did it for a duration of time. It wasn't a one-off, right? Like that, it was kind of like your life on the day-to-day. That is who Lukas Ebright was then. Mm-hmm. So if that idea of stay true to yourself, right, becomes tainted a bit, and I'm challenging that idea, because people say that shit all the time, and you can tell right now it mildly gets under my skin, right? Because it becomes an excuse, right? It becomes an excuse not to be better. So had you stayed true to yourself then, right, you wouldn't be the Lukas that we all know and love now. And not that we didn't know and love you then, right? You were just a little more cocky. And absolutely, you've grown so much just in the last couple of years, whether that's in perception or responsibility and maturity. Absolutely, I don't think anyone in your life would question that. And if they do, then they don't know you very well. So how do we challenge that exact idea of staying true to yourself?
So I would say this is where the self-reflection comes into play. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to put it into a bodybuilding aspect.
Yeah, absolutely.
So bodybuilding, you're literally looking at yourself in the mirror and recognize what part of your body could you improve on. So I believe that was what led me to my beginning of my journey. So I was able to look at myself and recognize my physical flaws. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to think about what else you did that day and the interactions you've had with other people. So let's say I made a teasing remark about somebody else in the gym who was just getting started in the gym and just starting their physical journey. If I looked at that now, I'd be like, dude, that is so toxic gym culture. Like, that person is just in there trying to improve himself. And then you did that and tore them down.
And they might have given up. That could have been the thing that made them quit.
Yep. So from the bodybuilding aspect, you're literally looking at yourself and reflecting on what you can improve on. But you have to be able to have that ability to reflect on your actions rather than just literally looking yourself in the mirror.
Yep, which is kind of the epitome of that, is having taking a moment to self-reflect, to gain the awareness, right? Wanting to engage in action to be better at that thing, whether it's a particular part of your body. So you're like, and we've had chats before, you're like, hey, what should I work on today, right? And I'll pick on you a little bit, like, yeah, it looks like shoulders need a little work, right? Can only do that because of the understanding that we have, right? At the same time, if I change you to somebody else, I wouldn't have said that, right? Because if I don't know their context of their life, at the same time, they would have never asked me for any input in that regard. So as you move forward, as we move forward, kind of acknowledging the premise, the influence and impact of the mind, body, and spirit, and how those three things can interconnect to inspire, to motivate people to self-reflect, which leads to self-awareness, right? The acknowledgement that is helpful, but it is rather meaningless if that doesn't transition to action. What would be, through your experience over these last few years, what would be your nugget, your advice, your acknowledgement to help people who are stuck in limbo between the awareness and the action?
Discipline. Self-discipline.
Okay. And what does that mean when you say that?
So, as I said earlier, the way you think is the way you behave. So, if you're thinking about yourself like you need to make improvements on it, that's when it takes the self-discipline to put that into action. And let's say you're in a situation where you're getting frustrated with somebody, and then you start saying things that you don't really mean because you're angry or frustrated. It takes self-discipline to be able to control your emotions and your thoughts to translate how you treat that person. So that would be an example of self-discipline in the emotional aspect, and putting that into action. Okay, so that's probably the best way that I could put it.
What I really hear you saying is the ability to kind of take a step back, to be a little more objective and understand the impact or influence you're having on that situation, whether it be a person or even just an experience that you're having personally, right? Is having that inner dialogue to stop and try to course correct, try to adjust as necessary, with the understanding of we're not going to get it right all the time. In fact, we're going to get it wrong a whole lot of the time, right? But it's the acknowledgement and the effort that influences our growth. It is the ability to be like, hey, no, like I might not know why, but I have this like this gut feeling that this isn't okay, or maybe I shouldn't have done that, or maybe I should have done this a little bit differently, and then taking the steps to acknowledge and then put that into action.
How would you, what advice would you give to people who are in that middle ground between self-awareness and putting that into action?
Yeah, absolutely. So context matters, right? So depending on what that means for any particular person, would change, would absolutely change. I'll give you a couple of examples. So somebody who's procrastinating, right, in education, for example. So you have a test coming up and you're like this test is on Friday. I could prepare now and I could get myself ready for it. And I know if I do that, I'm going to stress less on Friday, but still choosing to wait till Friday morning to study for a test that is Friday at 11, right? So there's that situation. Or something on kind of the other side of that is a person who is in a domestic violent relationship, right? That they have kids and they know it's not okay, right? But they're having a hard time taking that sense of like, this isn't okay, it's not okay for me, it's not okay for the kids, this is toxic, unhealthy, there's fear, right? All of those things. The transition into action becomes way different, given context to it. So hopefully you and anyone listening are okay with me making generalized comments with that. So the first thing is acknowledging what you want. And I mean this literally what you want. So I've picked on my niece before. I'm going to do it again. Sorry, Joss, love you. Is her and I have had multiple conversations where she'll make a reference of wanting to come to visit, right? And she's always welcome, right? Any day, anytime. Love to have her here. So she'll make the comments, and recently, over recent months, I will express that you don't want that. You have the thought in your head that sounds good, right? And you feel as though that's what you should say. But if you wanted it, you would have done it, right? So now, barring gas prices, right, is kind of the obstacle. Vehicle gas prices, because she's had the time, we've had the time. Like there's very little obstacle there, right? So I'll use you as an example. Did you want to engage in bodybuilding competition? You did, right? You put that to action. Did you struggle at times? You absolutely fucking did, right? You had multiple obstacles. And yet here we are, still having the conversation with you having growth and a mindset of that, and you continuing to put that into action. Has it happened at the pace you wanted it? Fuck no, it didn't, right? You are not where you had hoped you would be 2 years ago, right? I would argue that you're in a better place now than then, right? But you would have gauged that comment by physical result only. And I would argue that if we take all those things, the mind, the body, and the spirit into that factor, profoundly a better person, profoundly more growth. You have been nailing the mind and spirit's weightlifting, if you will, right? So when we take all of that into context, to go back to answering your question, the folks that are in limbo, the first thing has to be honesty and objectivity to yourself, right? Because you can know that a thing isn't okay, but unless you're willing to actually want it to be different, you're just setting yourself up for failure and disappointment, right? So that would be you, for example. You have a bodybuilding competition, but the 3 months before you went to the competition, you didn't lift a damn weight, right? You ate like trash and didn't lift a single weight, right? And then when you go there, you have the disappointment that you didn't perform well. Well, your heart wasn't in it, right? You set yourself up to feel that way, right? And I know that's a little more tangible of an example, and things get way more complicated than that, right? And even if I go as far as like a struggle in domestic violence, right, is that somebody can have all those feelings that they need it to be better and whatnot, but they're also conflicted with love and hope and compassion, right? If I just do this, like this will be better, and they care for that other person, and there's so many dynamics that go into that. And I can reflect on my sister, and those, she's been very blatant and open throughout our episodes. If anyone's listening and want to check any of those out, it's look for anything with Tasha Melvin. We've had many conversations. So it wasn't till she was in her late 30s, right? So she has years and years and years and years. Shit, we grew up in domestic violence, right? So from our conception all the way till her late 30s is the time it took for her to understand, one, have the self-reflection and self-awareness, right? And even when she had that, still took a long time for her to feel, hey, nope, this is what I want now. This is what me and my children deserve, right? Those things aren't acceptable. And that's when she put those things into action. And that's just objectively viewing and having conversations with her. I love her to death. I have no judgment whatsoever of her decisions and the struggles that she had. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm trying to shit on her, and because she would say all the things that she has said all these things. Right? So again, objectivity and honesty to yourself, and that's what will propel people forward from that. A New Year's resolution. If you're making a resolution because you're supposed to, not because you actually have the desire to do that thing, that's why people fail, right? So I'm going to go on a diet, but I really don't want to do that. I really don't want to make that change, but I'm saying that I do because that's what you're supposed to do on January 1st, right? Well, you're setting yourself up to be disappointed, and that failure might actually push you into eating worse, right? Or into giving up. Right? Because the next time you think about, trying to get more physically healthy or start going for walks or whatever, right? You're going to reflect on the feeling of that failure. Right? So again, I would argue the most important thing when folks are in the limbo between awareness and action is that objectivity and honesty of really what do they want. And what you want this moment, this very second, it could be different in 10 seconds. Right? If I use you as an example, you had no way to anticipate the physical impact and experience you would have had, the impact that had on your mind and on your spirit, right? You did not walk into those woods with the expectation that would be the thing, but it was the thing. It was the experience you had, and that. So in the matter of moments, you went from being metaphorically Lucas the bully, right, to Lucas the enlightened, right? In the matter of moments, in moments that you couldn't have anticipated. And I'll use myself as an example all the time. And when it comes to the physical, the thing that transitions me from awareness to action, good, bad, indifferent, is disgust. It's when I do a thing or feel a way or see a part of myself, and it literally invokes a sense of disgust, right? Instantly, within that moment, changes will happen. And it doesn't just have to be the physical. If I say something that is hurtful, for example, I'll use Tracy in my relationship. Sometimes I'll wake up and I'll just be in a shit mood, right? I'm human, right? I am so far from perfect. Right. But the moment I know, I might not know why I'm in a shit mood, right? But everyone knows when you are, right? You're lying to yourself if you're in a shit mood and you pretend you're not. If you're like, nah, I'm fine. Bitch, you're not fine, right? And that's the stuff I say to myself. In the moment that happens, I tell Tracy, right? Because she doesn't deserve for me to be anything but excellent to her. She doesn't deserve for me to be anything but loving and caring and compassionate, mildly challenging, because it's good dialogue and we both grow from that, right? But she'll immediately know. And that's me giving permission, essentially, of saying, don't let me get away with any shit, right? Because you don't deserve that. Our relationship doesn't deserve that. Like, I want to be the best person that I can be. And today I might have an obstacle to that, right? Because for whatever reason, I'm fucking full of piss and vinegar. Right? But in order to do that, I had to be objective and I had to be honest with myself, right? Because I could have been, oh, I'm fine. And then she could have said something and I might have ignored her, or she could have said something and it really be funny, but it just kind of chaps my ass that day. And like I respond a little dickishly. Like, none of that's acceptable. Right? And we can't do that if we don't have that level of honesty and objectivity. So I'm going to pick on you for a minute, based on our conversation just before we started recording. Is that okay? So we were chatting a little bit about the home and kind of things that were going on there. Not giving specifics or details as much as to use this whole conversation about self-awareness, action, discipline, putting that into perspective of the physical, the mind, and the spirit, and the impact we have on others. You've changed from Lukas the bully to Lukas the enlightened, right? What is something that is happening today in your life today that you have a sense of awareness but are struggling putting that into action?
I would definitely say just basic daily tasks or responsibilities that I have. So from the home aspect, like, I recognize that maybe something could be cleaned. I just choose not to. I'd rather relax and sit at home and really do nothing. From a school aspect, there may be some homework that I need to get done before tomorrow or sometime early tomorrow morning. And as you said, procrastination plays a big role. So I might just say, no, I really don't want to do that. I'll do it first thing when I wake up in the morning. And like you said, if I were to do it right then when I had that thought about it, I wouldn't be stressed about it. But when I wake up in the morning, I have to put that into action. Otherwise, I'm not going to get that assignment done. Mm-hmm. So I would say it's definitely just a lack of motive or want to do that at that point in time. But I know that it should be done.
I want to say what I think I hear you saying. Tell me if this is bullshit. Is whether it's like home maintenance, whether it is education, doing homework, right? So when you say, I have the thought, I need to do this assignment, right? But I'm going to procrastinate until tomorrow morning, and that's when I'll do it. What I hear you saying is, even though you have the awareness, the motivation to do the thing, complete the task, grows as the consequence for not doing it grows.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd say that is definitely a correlation that is easy to point out.
So how do we, I'm going to use the word right, but I don't mean it in the sense of like morally or ethically right? I mean it more like interpersonally, I guess more the spiritual side of things. So how do we transition to doing the right thing even when the consequences aren't severe?
That's where I would say the self-discipline has to come into play, because you know the consequences are going to rise the more you procrastinate it. Mm-hmm. So why put yourself under that much more stress the closer you get to it? Like, oh my gosh, I'm about to face these consequences that I knew was going to happen, but I chose to make it this way and stress myself out about it.
Sure.
So to make that transition, I would say you need the self-discipline. And I will admit, I have definitely lacked self-discipline lately.
Oh, we all, as we all do, from one element of our life.
Short.
Yeah.
We all fall short every once in a while. But that's where, when I said earlier in the podcast, it takes self-discipline, reflection, and self-criticism to be able to put that into action. And self-discipline is definitely playing a big role in doing what needs to be done.
Doing that. So kind of that idea of discipline is doing the things that you know need to be done, whether regardless or not, if you want to do it.
Yes.
I'm going to kind of condense everything down through our conversation, which really what I hear you saying is that we live crazy busy lives with so many things happening kind of all at the same time, that a big impact to becoming better, to growing, to making changes, to engaging in health to whatever degree, again, whether physically, mentally, or spiritually, is we have to provide ourselves in moments to slow down, even for moments, in order to reflect, to understand, to self-evaluate and critique ourselves. And we don't mean that to say like take a moment to shit all over yourself, right? We mean that to say, hey, like what's going on with me, my life, my physical health, my mental health, my spiritual health, and where are things that I could do better? Where are things that I would get greater benefits from? And taking that understanding and then trying to move and transition to action so we actually reap those benefits. This is a little off topic. Tell me what you think as I say this. Actually, I posted it today on JTM community Facebook. So what is today? Today is March 10th. So if you want more understanding of what I'm referring to, check that out. March 10th post on JTM community Facebook. So the premise of this, and this is, I think it was meant to be, it's been something that I've talked about, and I think you and I have talked about this before as well, is the commodity of time, right? I'm very intentional of where I invest myself, right? Because it is literally life sacrifice. So engaging in our exchange and dialogue this morning, right? This is an hour you won't ever get back. This is an hour I won't ever get back, right? So the impacts of that are substantial, right? So having that intentionality, and what I've begun to understand over the course of these last few years, is the idea of love, not love romantically. And I don't believe that love is a thing you have for something else, right? Love is a state of being. It is the positivity. It's the way you perceive the world. And I fail all the time, absolutely all the time. When you're surrounded by negativity, it takes intentional effort to remind myself, hey, like the world isn't just this experience. When I have that clarity, doing the right thing becomes very easy, right? Or let me change that. Choosing to do the right thing becomes very easy, right? So I care for you and the family very much, right? I enjoy our sauna conversations, for example. So before we started to have this conversation, though it's uncomfortable for me, and I know it became uncomfortable for you, we had a candid conversation, right? And that conversation came through care and love. That was me struggling, taking that self-awareness of a situation and struggling to transition that to action, right? I didn't want to have that conversation. There's no joy in that for me, right? But there's compassion for you and for the family and your grandmother and all of those things. And for you to pause and take a moment and reciprocate that, right? You displayed the very growth that we've reflected on this whole episode. It's absolutely phenomenal. How do you take that and continue to propel that forward? How do you take like that idea of, and again, I want to use the word love, and I mean that so generically, right? Because I believe I know your heart decently, right? And I believe I know, based on our conversations, like how you feel towards the family, and I'm going to specifically say Judy, because that's what we're talking about right now. And how do you take that and continue to fertilize and grow the mindset you're developing, the spirituality that you're developing?
Well, first of all, it feels great. It feels great to do that. And when you are able to reflect on that and think like, okay, somebody can say something to me that I know isn't going to be a comfortable conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and I can still respond to that well and with love in my heart, and know that maybe I haven't been criticizing myself the way I should have been, but somebody else is doing it with their love and their heart.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of me getting frustrated and angry and totally rebuking that idea, that helped me. And I think moving forward, it's just going to be even more rewarding. Mm-hmm. Because more and more people are going to be comfortable talking about things that aren't really comfortable to them or to you as well. And you're going to have experience in that, and you're going to know the impact that you're going to have on somebody else's life.
Absolutely. Which is, if I'm being honest, is the whole premise and creation about this whole community, is to having uncomfortable dialogue, uncomfortable exchanges in order to motivate ourselves, to inspire ourselves and other people to grow. I mean, I think you would agree with this, is we have culturally, we have created an environment where once people are at odds, they just shut down, right? They think less of the other person. People lose friends over differing opinions, which is mind-blowing to me that's where we have gotten. So the fact that at a young age, such as yourself, and in a culture where having discourse isn't really, it's not supported, right? There's almost the expectation of, I'm just going to use politics as a tangible, right? It's like Democrat versus Republican. Like, that's like, you're supposed to like do that, which is fucking crazy that that's a thing, right? So again, I can't applaud and thank you enough for having that conversation before, for us being willing to talk about it here, and you share kind of that growth through that process. And I want to steal what you said, is it feels good, right? So if you're going to do the right thing for no other reason, do it because it feels good. Any last words of wisdom or nuggets for folks before we wrap things up?
I would say one last thing, and that is, before you take action, consider the potential outcomes. So just our example of our conversation before we started this podcast, I could have rebuked you and totally disrespected everything that you had to say to me.
Sure.
And that definitely would have caused some problems with our relationship.
Would have made an interesting episode.
Yeah. Or I consider the outcome where, okay, maybe I'm in the wrong. I can criticize myself after he's pointed that out to me, and I can make a change about it and become a better version of myself. So you just got to consider the potential outcomes before you act.
Yep. And absolutely. And just for the sake of clarity, at no point I hope that I didn't give the perception of right or wrong as much as better. Right. Again, Luke, I appreciate you, for one, reaching out and saying, hey, like, I have this idea, this topic that has hit my heart that I would really like to talk about. I always enjoy our conversations. So anytime that happens, you let me know. The answer will always be absolutely, let's do it. Scheduling might be a little hinky, as I gave you a little bit of shit, I think it was yesterday, but the answer will absolutely always be yes, and that's how we grow ourselves and how we grow the community. Again, for anyone who is listening that wants to hear a little bit more from Luke, you can do so in the previous episode, which is titled Motivation and Routine. You can check him out, and he talks about a few different things as far as injury and going into bodybuilding and competition and some of the obstacles and how he overcame that. If you want to touch base with me for advancement advising, you can do so at j-tm.community/podcast, where you can also join all of said platforms and Facebook. All of those links are going to be on the top right of the site. If you're looking for additional resources, both nationally and to the Mount Pleasant, Michigan area, you can also find those under community partners. Again, Luke, I appreciate you for joining me for this conversation. And for all of the folks watching and listening, thanks for tuning in and being part of a community where you belong.